The Arctic night swallowed sound, light and hope alike. Somewhere beyond the black horizon, hidden by snow squalls and a moonless sky, one of the most powerful warships ever built was racing through freezing seas alone. The German battleship Scharnhorst, pride of the Kriegsmarine, killer of convoys, hunter of the North Atlantic, was running straight into destiny. Her guns were cold, her radar blind, and her crew, nearly 2,000 men, did not yet know that before this night ended, almost all of them would be dead. This was not just the sinking of a ship. It was the violent extinction of a myth. When Scharnhorst had first touched water years earlier, she represented something dangerous, speed married to heavy firepower, elegance fused with brutality. Sleek, fast, and deadly, she was built to outfight what she could not outrun and outrun what she could not outfight. British admirals feared her name. Convoy captains whispered it. To them, Scharnhorst was not steel and rivets. It was a shadow that could appear without warning, rip ships apart, and vanish into fog and darkness. Yet by December 1943, the war had changed. The oceans were no longer empty hunting grounds. Radar watched the darkness. Aircraft scouted the horizons. Codebreakers listened to whispers meant to be secret. And the hunters were now being hunted. The final mission of Scharnhorst began not with glory, but with desperation. Germany's surface fleet was bleeding out. The mighty Bismarck lay at the bottom of the Atlantic. The Graf Spee was gone. The Tirpitz was trapped in Norwegian fjords, bombed again and again until she became a floating prison. What remained of Germany's surface power was scattered, cautious, and afraid of annihilation. But the Eastern Front demanded supplies. German troops were starving. The Arctic convoys, long lines of Allied merchant ships sailing from Britain and America to the Soviet Union, were a lifeline Hitler wanted severed at any cost. And so, despite the risks, Scharnhorst was ordered to sail. The mission was simple in theory and suicidal in reality: break into the Arctic routes, destroy convoy WWII, and escape before the British home fleet could respond. Speed would be her shield. Surprise would be her weapon. The Arctic winter would be her ally. On the afternoon of December 25, 1943, Christmas Day, Scharnhorst slipped from her Norwegian anchorage. Snow fell thick and heavy. Visibility was miserable. The sea was alive with ice and fury. Her captain, Conter-Admiral Erich Bay, was not a reckless man. He understood the danger. He knew the British would react fast. But orders were orders, and the ship moved northward, her turbines pushing her through black, freezing waves. From the very beginning, things went wrong. Almost immediately, brutal Arctic weather interfered with Scharnhorst radar, her eyes in the darkness. Snowstorms blinded her sensors. Ice-coated exposed equipment. Lookouts could barely see past the bow. Worse still, Admiral Bay made a decision that would later haunt history. He ordered the destroyer screen, Scharnhorst's protective escort, to split up and search independently for the convoy. In theory, this widened the search net. In reality, it stripped the battleship of her early warning system. Alone in hostile waters, Scharnhorst pushed onward, unaware that the British already knew she was coming. Thousands of miles away, but listening closely, British intelligence had cracked German naval communications. The moment Scharnhorst sailed, alarms rang. The Royal Navy moved with cold efficiency. Vice Admiral Bruce Fraser assembled a trap of terrifying precision. Heavy cruisers were positioned as bait. Destroyers stalked likely escape routes. And waiting beyond them all was the battleship HMS Duke of York, armed with radar, directed guns that could see and kill through darkness and snow. This was no chance encounter. It was an execution waiting to happen. As night deepened over the Arctic Circle, Scharnhorst finally detected shapes in the gloom. British cruisers patrolling the convoy wrote. The first exchange of gunfire erupted suddenly, violently. Shells screamed through darkness. Orange flashes lit the storm. For a moment, Scharnhorst fought like the legend she was. Her guns roared. Her speed allowed her to disengage. And she vanished once more into snow and shadow. But fate does not forgive first escapes. A British shell slammed into Scharnhorst's radar antenna. Sparks flew. Steel twisted. In one brutal instant, the German battleship was blinded. Her greatest advantage, situational awareness, was gone. She was now a predator without eyes, charging forward on instinct alone. Still unaware of the full British force assembling around her, Scharnhorst continued the mission. She believed she could still find the convoy. She believed speed would save her. She believed, as she always had, that she was untouchable. Behind her, British destroyers closed in silently, their torpedo tubes loaded, their radar screens glowing with deadly clarity. And far beyond them, cutting through the Arctic night like a steel executioner, HMS Duke of York was coming. By the time Scharnhorst realized the truth, that she was surrounded, outnumbered, and blind, it was already too late to turn back. The Arctic had chosen its victim, and the night was just beginning. The darkness over the Arctic Ocean was no ordinary night. It was a living thing, thick, crushing, and absolute. Snow whipped sideways in violent gusts, erasing the horizon, swallowing distance, turning sea and sky into a single black void. Somewhere within that void, Scharnhorst drove forward at high speed, her bow smashing into freezing waves, her steel hull groaning under the strain. She was fast, still terrifyingly fast, but now she was blind, and speed without sight is only a longer run toward disaster. On her bridge, Admiral Erich Bay stood wrapped in heavy winter gear, staring into nothingness. Reports filtered in, fragmented, uncertain. Radar was gone. Radio traffic was confusing. The destroyers he had sent away earlier were now ghosts in the storm, scattered and out of position. The plan that had seemed cautious hours earlier was unraveling with every passing minute. Still, Bay believed he had one card left, to play disengage, turn south, and use Scharnhorst's raw speed to escape, before the British could fully concentrate their forces. What he did not know, what he could not know, was that escape routes no longer existed. Far to the southwest, HMS Duke of York surged through the heavy seas, her massive hull cutting steadily forward. Unlike Scharnhorst, she could see. Her Type 284 radar sliced through snow and darkness, painting glowing targets on screens deep inside her armored heart. To the British gunners, the Arctic night was no longer blind chaos, it was a map. Every contact, every shadow, every movement was measured and tracked. Vice Admiral Bruce Fraser was calm. He had waited years for a moment like this. German surface raiders had humiliated the Royal Navy early in the war, but now the balance had shifted. This was no reckless pursuit. It was geometry, patience, and timing. The cruisers ahead had already bloodied Scharnhorst. Now the battleship would deliver the killing blows. As midnight approached, Scharnhorst changed course, hard to starboard, her engines pushing her southward at nearly 30 knots. The ship vibrated with power. Below decks, stokers fed the boilers relentlessly. Engineers fought ice buildup. Gun crews stood frozen at their stations, fingers numb, breath steaming in the darkness. They did not yet know they were running straight into the jaws of the home fleet. The first sign came suddenly. On Duke of York, radar operators called out a firm, unmistakable contact. Range closing fast, speed high. There was no doubt anymore. The prey had wandered into the execution zone. Fraser gave the order. At 500 yards, Duke of York fired her first salvo. The night exploded. 16-inch shells tore into the darkness like falling meteors. The shockwave rolled across the sea. On Scharnhorst, lookouts barely had time to react before towering columns of water erupted around the ship. Seconds later, steel screamed. One shell smashed into her forward superstructure, ripping through compartments, killing men instantly. Another detonated near the forward turrets, sending shards of armor and flesh through gun crews. For the first time that night, Scharnhorst was no longer the hunter. She returned fire blindly, her guns roaring in defiance, flashes lighting up the storm. But without radar, her salvos were guesses, brave, violent guesses, but guesses all the same. British shells, guided by radar and cold precision, walked closer and closer. A hit tore into Scharnhorst's forward turret, jamming it. Another blasted her hangar, igniting fuel and wreckage. Fires burned, their glow reflecting off snow and sea. Men fought flames with frozen hoses. Wounded sailors screamed in the darkness. Still, the ship pushed on, engines intact, speed unbroken. For a moment, it seemed possible. Scharnhorst accelerated. 30 knots, 31, 32. She began to pull away, stretching distance between herself and Duke of York. On the British bridge, tension rose. The German ship was fast, faster than expected, and every minute of separation threatened to break the trap. Then came the hit that sealed her fate. A British shell penetrated Scharnhorst's boiler room. The explosion was catastrophic. Steam blasted through compartments at scalding temperatures. Machinery shattered. Men were killed instantly. Others burned alive before they could even scream. Her speed dropped suddenly, from over 30 knots to barely 22. It was the moment of no return. Destroyers closed in. Out of the storm emerged British destroyers like wolves sensing blood. One by one, they launched torpedoes, their white wakes briefly visible before disappearing into darkness. Alarms screamed aboard Scharnhorst. The ship heeled violently as she turned, evading some torpedoes by meters, explosions rocking her hull as others detonated nearby. Then one struck home. The blast ripped open her starboard side. Water flooded in. The ship slowed again. Another torpedo hit moments later, and another. By now, Scharnhorst was wounded, burning, and surrounded. Yet still she fought. Her remaining guns fired again and again, defiance echoing across the Arctic night. She hit one destroyer, tearing into its hull, forcing it to withdraw. Her crew worked like demons, sealing compartments, manning guns, carrying the wounded through smoke-filled corridors. Even as hope drained away, discipline held. Back on Duke of York, Fraser ordered the final engagement. At close range now, the British battleship unleashed everything she had. Shell after shell slammed into Scharnhorst. Turrets were smashed. Communications were severed. Fires raged uncontrollably. The German ship slowed to a crawl. Listing heavily, her proud lines broken and scarred beyond recognition. Admiral Bay knew the truth. The mission was over. Escape was impossible. Survival was no longer an option. Still, he did not order surrender. Instead, Scharnhorst continued to fight until her guns fell silent, one by one. Not from lack of courage, but from total destruction. Her flag still flew. Her crew still manned stations even as water poured in. The Arctic night watched in silence, and beneath the frozen waves, death waited patiently. The sea had grown strangely quiet, as if the Arctic itself was holding its breath. Snow still fell, but the wind eased, and in that unnatural calm, the ruined shape of Scharnhorst drifted through darkness like a wounded animal refusing to die. Fires flickered across her decks, their orange glow reflected in black water. Her engines were failing. Her guns were silent. And yet, somehow, she still floated. Inside the ship, the world had become a maze of smoke, steam, and screaming metal. Compartments were flooded without warning. Ladders vanished beneath icy water. Men moved by memory alone, crawling through darkness thick with oil and blood. Orders could no longer travel through shattered communication lines. Leadership collapsed into instinct: help the wounded, fight the fire, stay alive 1 minute longer. Admiral Eric Bay was already dead. Somewhere during the bombardment, a shell or splinter had torn through the bridge, killing him instantly. No announcement was made. No ceremony marked his passing. Command simply ceased to exist. The ship fought on not because she was ordered to, but because her crew did not know how to stop. Outside, British destroyers circled slowly, patiently. This was no longer a battle. It was a methodical execution. One by one, they moved into position, radar guiding them through darkness as flawlessly as daylight. Torpedo tubes were reloaded. Ranges were calculated. Orders were whispered. Then the final attack began. From multiple directions, torpedoes streaked towards Scharnhorst. There was nowhere left to turn. The first impact shook her violently, tearing open already flooded compartments. The second struck deeper, ripping through her machinery spaces. The third and fourth hit almost together, explosions echoing through her hull like thunder inside a coffin. Water rushed in uncontrollably. The ship slowed to a dead stop. The list increased sharply. Decks tilted at terrifying angles. Men slid across steel, smashing into bulkheads. Ammunition cooked off in small, vicious explosions. Fires met seawater in hissing clouds of steam. Somewhere deep inside, the lights went out, for good, on Duke of York. Admiral Fraser watched in silence. He did not cheer. No one did. This was victory, yes, but it was also annihilation. As Scharnhorst bow dipped lower, her stern rose slightly out of the water. Propellers briefly visible, still, useless, frozen. The sea rushed over her decks now, pouring through gun housings, ventilation shafts, shattered armor. The proud ship that had once ruled the North Atlantic was dying fast. And then, at 1945, on December 26, 1943, Scharnhorst rolled. For a moment she hung there, half submerged, fires still burning, snow falling onto a sinking warship, before the sea claimed her entirely. With a final, massive roar of escaping air and collapsing steel, she slipped beneath the Arctic waves. She was gone. The ocean closed above her as if she had never existed. Silence followed. No explosion. No dramatic finale. Just darkness and water. Then came the screams. Hundreds of men thrashed in the freezing sea. Their survival measured not in minutes, but seconds. Arctic water does not forgive. It kills without anger or mercy. Life jackets stiffened. Limbs went numb. Voices faded quickly into the night. British ships attempted rescue, but conditions were brutal. Fear of U-boats haunted every pause. Searchlights cut through darkness, illuminating faces twisted in terror and exhaustion. Hands reached out from the water. Some were pulled aboard. Most were not. Of nearly 2,000 men aboard Scharnhorst, only 36 survived. 36. The rest vanished into the cold depths, entombed with their ship beneath more than 300 meters of icy sea. Wives would never receive bodies. Children would never know graves. Names would be carved into memorials instead of stone. The loss of Scharnhorst was more than the sinking of a battleship. It was the death of Germany's surface navy. Never again would a major German warship challenge the Royal Navy in open sea. From that night onward, the Kriegsmarine retreated into shadows, U-boats beneath the waves, remnants hiding in fords, powerless to change the course of the war. Radar had won. Coordination had won. Intelligence had won. Speed alone was no longer enough. Years later, explorers would find Scharnhorst resting on the seabeat, broken in two but unmistakable. Her guns still pointed outward, her steel still defiant, a grave marker for a generation sent into darkness by ambition and orders they could not refuse. The Arctic remembers. It always does. And somewhere beneath those frozen waters, the mighty Scharnhorst lies silent, no longer a hunter, no longer a legend, only a warning, carved in steel and salt, about what happens when power meets inevitability. The ocean closed over Scharnhorst, but her story did not sink with her. Beneath the frozen Arctic waves, steel still rests where ambition met reality, where speed met radar, and where an empire lost its final chance at sea. Nearly 2,000 men vanished into darkness that night, not as villains or heroes, but as sailors following orders in a war that showed no mercy. The sinking of Scharnhorst was not just the end of a battleship, it was the end of Germany's dream of ruling the oceans. From that moment on, the seas belonged to those who could see in the dark, who could listen before they struck, and who understood that modern war no longer rewarded strength alone. History remembers victories, but the Arctic remembers silence, and Scharnhorst still lies there, a warning written in steel, ice, and time. If you found this story powerful, make sure to subscribe for more untold World War II stories that history books often leave behind. And tell me in the comments, do you think Scharnhorst ever had a real chance to escape, or was her fate sealed the moment she sailed into the Arctic storm?